And welcome into the week 13 edition of the Consistently Cashin podcast here at BigGuyFantasySports.com. I am Colby Conway at Colby R. Conway over on X, formerly known as Twitter, as they be calling it. With me here, as always, Ron Rigney. Waivers be scary. You are correct indeed. So, Ron, it's been a week since we've officially talked in person, aka via the computer. How's everything going for you, my friend?
Good, man. This is another big bye week. Bob and I talked about it on Thursday night, especially I think the position that it affects you the most is tight end, man. There's some solid tight ends either on the shelf with injury or got the bye week off. But I started this lineup out and it didn't go so well the first time around, so I scrapped it and went back at it. And I think I've created something here that I kind of like, and I'm leaving a couple guys out that I want to get in there. But I think that we're going to build something that we're going to get back on the winning track this week. I think we barely missed it last week. I think you said about a point and a half, and we missed it. So we're going to be right back there this week. So let's get after it.
Yep, we just missed about a point and a half last week. I actually put up a really good number, 147, I think it was, and the cash line was like 148.3 or something like that. So we were right around it. We were in it until through the 1 o'clock games, we were in it, and then we had Shakir and Njoku, if I believe, and they were fine, but we not having any of the horses in some of those in the Buffalo Philly game, none of the horses that popped off kind of did us in there a bit. But yep, we're looking to get back on track here. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the board for the week 13 slate. And I know you had mentioned that the tight end position takes a little bit of a hit. I am going to one up that and say so does the quarterback position, because as you can see, we only have 5 quarterbacks at $7,000 or above. And then when you look, obviously in the Thursday night game, we have no Dak, no Geno. We get no Mahomes because he's the Sunday night game. And then we have like 98 teams on bye. So quarterback is a bit rough this week. Do any of the $7,000 or above quarterbacks catch your eye for the week 13 slate?
I mean, of course, Tua jumps off the page there against Washington and against a team that I think is kind of starting to, I don't want to say give up, but that with deals they made with trading all their pass rushers, and they weren't good in the back end anyway. But I think Tua is kind of the chalky play there. And plus, Sam Howell on the other side, they're slinging it. He's going to have to. He's going to keep it close. But I think as far as those, I mean, I think you can make an argument for C.J. Stroud as well. But I feel like, and I know you probably would play C.J. Stroud every week if you could, but I feel like we got to go away from him at some point. And I like Tua a lot, but if I got Tua, I want that Tyreek Hill stack. And that's what I was saying earlier. It's awfully tough to build something you feel good about going with those two guys. So I backed off a little bit, but if I'm going there at the top, Tua is the guy that I'm going to try to go with.
I would agree on that as well. Of those options, it would certainly be him. Very good matchup against the most generous secondary in football. However, my lineup did not feature anybody of the $7,000 and above. For me, the one I've really locked in on is Brock Purdy.
Yes, sir.
$6,100. Philly is just as generous as Washington, if not more, in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And I talked about it on the Prop It Like It's Hot podcast because I have exposure to 2 different 49ers for player props. So make sure you go check out that podcast and article out that I did with the one and only Bob Lung. I'm taking a walk down narrative street. I said that on the Prop It Like It's Hot podcast as well. Given how the NFC Championship game shook out last year, because it was 49ers Eagles in the NFC Championship game, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the NFC Championship game. So with the way that game shaked out, they believe they would have won with Brock Purdy. I would not be surprised if the 49ers come out here and say, we are going to stomp this team into the ground. The gas is not, or the foot's not coming off the gas pedal. We are going to score, because we are not only going to beat you, but we are going to prove the point that we would have beat you in 2022. Well, I guess that game was probably played in the 2023 calendar year. So I guess we would have beat you earlier this year, despite it being a different season. So I really like Brock Purdy at $6,100.
Agreed. That was the immediate pivot because I started to look at tight end and I like George Kittle, and I don't know, pivoted off of him. But like I said, when you put Tua in that lineup, that devotes a lot of salary to those Dolphins players, and rightfully so, because I think the points are going to be there. But immediately when you pivot off of Brock Purdy, that's kind of when I just had that aha moment that my lineup looks pretty solid. But yeah, $6,100, and between Kyle Shanahan and Nick Sirianni, I don't think there's any love lost there. Not that they have a feud or anything, but they just seem like you were talking about earlier, both guys that want to try to prove a point. I think both guys that if they could score 100 points on your defense, they would absolutely do it. So I think, and you said too, it's hard to believe that Eagles secondary is as bad as it is, with that front seven being as good as it is. But I mean, the numbers back it up. So I think he's a no-brainer at $6,100.
Yep. Over the last 4 weeks, Eagles allowing the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks for the 2023 season as a whole, second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So I think Brock Purdy's the play at 6,100. If you go down a little bit more, is there anybody here that's somewhat appealing? I think at this point, I'm contractually obligated to say Gardner Minshew just because I feel like I recommend him every single week, regardless of matchup. And he wasn't bad last week, but I mean, if he gives us another 15 points, I think it was 15 last week. Yeah, another 15. That's 3 times our money, and it's a good matchup against Tennessee. Earlier, I mean, this year he wasn't as good against them, but I do like the passing attack for Indy, but I'm going to talk about another Colt a little bit later. So anybody below Purdy that catches your eye?
The only guy that I would have really taken a swing on, and I know this is, when you scroll down a little bit, there's a couple matchups that look good, but when I look at the quarterback that has that matchup, do I trust Kenny Pickett? Do I trust Bryce Young? I thought about Joe Flacco all the way down to $4,600. I mean, when you think about was it last year or the year before when he came in at the Jets, threw for 300 yards, spread the ball all over the place. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but he's got some weapons there. He's got Njoku. He's got Amari Cooper on the outside. Yeah, so there's a couple weapons there, and it shakes out to be a decent matchup against the Rams. But if you really wanted to save some cash, probably more of a GPP play. But at $4,600, that was kind of where I went next. But in the in between, there really just wasn't a lot for me that I felt good about.
I would agree. I love the matchup for Russell Wilson against Houston, but he just the game's not in his hands.
Yeah,
they're winning with him, not because of him. And is he going to give us enough fantasy juice? I mean, he's been fine, 17, 14, 18, 18, 13, but I don't think we're getting this 20 plus point Russ even in a very good matchup. They're going to be willing. I have some other thoughts on that game. Like I said, I think it's going to trend to the under. So there's another piece of this game I'll probably get to in a little bit. At running back, obviously McCaffrey, Eckler, Kamara are the top dogs there. League winner Kyron Williams is in play also at plus 7,000, but it's a very tough matchup. I'll be honest with you, Ron, I have no high-priced running back in my lineup, and by high-priced, I'm saying above $6,500.
No, I mean, you look at McCaffrey, and I think he's going to make a little bit of a difference. I mean, he's going to do it in the passing game, but I think the running is going to be tough sledding against that. Like I said, against that Eagles front seven. You've got Eckler there, you've got Kamara there. I don't like any of the matchups here at the top. The only one I might consider going with, I don't want to go with an all Dolphins lineup here, is Raheem Mostert. They're at $7,300. You mentioned Kyron Williams, but yeah, I'm not paying up for any of these guys. Both the guys that I went with are in that $5 to $6 range, and I think you're probably in the same spot.
I sure am. So let's talk about our actual targets here. The first one for me is Rachaad White. We hit the nail on the head last week with Derrick Henry against Carolina, albeit I would have loved more yards from him. We did get multiple scores, so that was good. And this year, Carolina is allowing the third most fantasy points per game to running backs. And when you dive into it a little bit more, bottom 5 in terms of rushing yards allowed to the position. They haven't been as favorable in the passing attack, but regardless, Rachaad White's going to get the ball thrown to him. So I really like Rachaad White at 6,300. And then the other guy I really like at 6,000 above is Ramondre Stevenson. Weather should help the run game there. And when you look at Stevenson, he's got back-to-back games of 20 carries and 5 targets, or 20 plus carries, let me say, and 5 targets. So I know he was bad early on, but he's coming on strong of late. And it's a very good matchup against a Chargers defense that's allowed the 7th, 1, 2, 3, 6. Okay, close. 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs this year, and they've allowed a lot through the air, and Stevenson gets the ball there. So in that that mid-tier around 6,000, Rachaad White and Ramondre Stevenson were the 2 that jumped out to me.
Like that Stevenson play, and you got Zeke Elliott listed as questionable. Of course, that's the New England injury report, so you never know how much to believe with that. But you might see, even if he does play, maybe a few less carries, maybe that favors Stevenson. Love the Rachaad White pick. I ended up going with in mind, the only thing I don't like about these two is I don't know how it plays out as far as touches, but I went Devin Singletary and Najee Harris, 59 and 5,200. Najee Harris has been getting the touchdowns. I know we like Jalen Warren. He's in play there as well, as being able to crack off a big play anytime you want. And I think that game's going to be a little closer, too, than what people think with Kyler Murray there. But if we can get Rachaad White in there, I do like that quite a bit. I just had to pay down a little bit for the rest of the way when I went the rest of my lineup. So I'm going to add those 2 guys in as well as ones that love the matchups. And I think that there's, with the price point, I think there's some room on the bone there for you to get something.
Denver's allowed the most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. And when you look over the last 4 weeks, they have been better. in that department, but they're still about league average. And Singletary is the running back one for this team. He fits the scheme better than Dameon Pierce does and has, really. So Singletary would be the guy there. Yeah, the touches are interesting. I think there is enough to go around in Pittsburgh because I think Pittsburgh's going to see what the Rams just did to the Cardinals. And I mean, we saw what Singletary did to the Cardinals just a week back too. So you can definitely run on them. So I think picking between those two, if you get the right one, could help your lineup a good bit at a cost. Let me tell you this. I have Zach Moss in every build I've done. It's not a good matchup because, right, I'm going to contradict myself immediately after I say it all within the same breath. You can't run on Tennessee, but he went for $165 and 2 scores earlier this season against him. Jonathan Taylor's not there, and look when Taylor didn't play. 18 carries, 30 carries, 18 carries, 23 carries, a couple of targets in each of those games as well, minus that one. I don't know how you don't look at Zach Moss because volume's king in fantasy, and he's getting that. And look at the guys around him. Is anybody else here getting 20 carries? Maybe Najee if game script helps. Not Pierce, not Kelly, not Pirine, not Kareem Hunt. Zach Moss is. Not Wilson because Achan's back. None of these guys around him are going to be even close to 15 carries other than Harris. And we got Moss who might get 25 opportunities. I don't love the matchup. I know he did it once against them, but at 4,600, I think Zach Moss is going to be the chalk in the free square that we're almost going to have to put in.
Yeah, that's immediately where I started at this position, and I just kind of shied away from it from the matchup a little bit. But everything you said is spot on, and they're going to want to run the football, and they know they can do it with Zach Moss. They've done it. The offensive line's been better this year, and Tennessee they're kind of middle of the road. They're not as great against the run as we kind of make them out to be. So I think that there's enough there. I mean, like you said, at $4,600, there's not too many guys getting 20 carries at any price point, let alone at $4,600. So I'm with you on that 100%. And if it allows us to get the guys like Tyreek Hill and some of these guys in the lineup later, then I think it's definitely a play. But I mean, if nothing else, he's going to get goal line work. He's going to get all the work out of the backfield pretty much, and pretty good bet he's going to score a touchdown or two.
Let's go over to wide receivers. Let's start Tyreek Hill, top price, top dog this week. I mean, saying he get 200 yards this week probably isn't even a bold prediction because it's such a good matchup and everything like that, with the Commanders allowing the second most fantasy points per game to receivers this year, but the most receiving yards and a whopping 18 touchdowns this season. And Tyreek Hill is the number one in this passing attack. So I think we're both in agreement that Tyreek Hill at 9,600 is the top dog here. I'm also going to give a shout to Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8,500. He should see a good bit of Alontae Taylor in the slot for the Saints, and no cornerback in slot coverage has allowed more receptions or more yards than Mr. Taylor. And guess where Amon-Ra St. Brown lives? The slot. Guess who gets 15 targets a week? St. Brown. We basically, and on DraftKings where you get the PPR, he basically has a floor of 20 fantasy points. So can you fit both Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown? Now that's the question. Cooper Kupp's the easiest fade on the slate for me. I just can't trust him anymore, at least right now. I mean, look at these numbers. It's ridiculous. He doesn't have more than 4 catches in a game since week 6. And I mean, look at this, 2 out of 7. I'm not very good at math, but that's like 28% reception rate. 4 out of 10. I can do this math. That's 40%. Yeah. 2 out of 7. We're right back there again. Cool, 100, but that was on 1 target, and then 60 on just 5 targets. It just hasn't been their easiest fade on the slate. Of these top price guys, let's say Cooper Kupp and above, are you with me on it's Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown as 1 and 1A or 1 and 2?
It absolutely is. I mean, anything above $8,000, you got to go there. There's a couple guys in the 7,600 range, 7,000 range that I don't think are bad. If you move down a little bit, I don't so much mind if you don't want to pay up for Tyreek Hill. I think Jalen Waddle is just as much in play there at his price point at 7,600. When I had Tua in, that's who I pivoted to, and I liked it a little better that way. Devontae Smith is another guy that I like. Talked about him Thursday night on the Consistency Show. They're finding ways to get him the ball, and he's responding, and he's making big plays. Of course, Michael Pittman, wide receiver 1 in Indianapolis, finally doing what we think he could do. But I think when you're going at those guys at the absolute top, Tyreek Hill, my next receiver, I didn't go Amon-Ra St. Brown. I do like him a lot though, where he's at in this matchup. But I went with Brandon Ayuk. We're going with Purdy. We got to stack somebody with him. And I think, me personally, I think $7,200 is a little bit cheap for Brandon Ayuk in this spot that he's in against Philly.
You glossed over him, and I was getting ready to talk about him. And yes, he is one of my favorite wide receivers on the slate. He is far superior than Deebo Samuel has been this season against man coverage. Eagles employ a lot of man coverage, and when you look at Ayuk at only 7,200, a Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk stack is very, 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 very affordable.
And I was saying the price on that is just ridiculous. You're almost stealing at this point.
Yep, I would agree there. If we drop down a little bit here, the Houston receivers are interesting just because I don't know who they're going to put Pat Surtain on. I would think Nico, because the play type is kind of more similar. But when you're looking at this Houston offense of late, I would pretty sure any coach would say the guy we need to stop is Tank Dell.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what they're going to do. I don't have the only exposure to Houston. Any Houston player I have in DFS this week has been a tight end, which I don't want to talk about that yet until we get there. We go down here. I don't really want Debo. I can't trust DeAndre Hopkins, albeit a good matchup. Cortland Sutton has been the main guy for Russell Wilson. Houston's been bad against receivers. I understand if you want to go there. I will give a nod to Jerry Jeudy, though, just because Tavier Thomas has been so bad in slot coverage the past couple of weeks, and that's where Jeudy tends to live. So you could look to him. And if you don't have enough for Pittman, Josh Downs is a very logical option as well, because now that he's finally healthy after, I believe it was a week or two with a bum knee, and then they had the bye week, we presumed he would be healthy for the Week 12 matchup. Only caught 5 of 13 targets, but that's what matters, the 13 targets. Clear-cut wide receiver 1A for them behind Pittman, and Tennessee very, very vulnerable to receivers, allowing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth most fantasy points per game. Or I'm sorry, that's yards and touchdowns. They've actually allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Anybody in this kind of mid-tier range that you find appealing?
So looking at those Denver receivers, the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause on that is I talked about Russell Wilson in the consistency show Thursday night, and I was shocked when I looked up Russell Wilson's stats because I don't own him anywhere. 20 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But when you look at those yardage totals are consistently right around 200 or even below. He's gone for 3 a couple of weeks, but out of all the weeks he's played, I think maybe 3 times he's gone, maybe 2 or 3 times he's gone over 300 yards. So I feel like Sutton and Jeudy are very, very touchdown dependent. If they're not getting that touchdown for us, I don't feel like that there's enough there. But here again, with them playing Houston, with Houston's ability to be able to score, I think that drives the score up a little bit. So I'm a little torn on that one. Where I settled with my wide receiver 3 though was Jahan Dotson at $4,600. Here again, we talked about that there's going to be points scored in this game, and you look at his targets over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks. Had 6 last week, had 10 against Philly a few weeks ago, had 9 against Philly. So I mean, he's showed out against some of these defenses, and like we said, they're going to have to throw the football. But Jahan Dotson's always a threat to score, threat for a big play. But I think if he can get 6 or 7 targets, and if he can get you a touchdown on top of that, maybe get you 6 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown, I think for that $4,600, I want to get a piece of that Washington pass attack. And I feel like Terry McLaurin's a little bit more than I want to pay up for. I don't want to go with Logan Thomas because there's other tight ends I like better, but I really feel good about Jahan Dotson as my wide receiver 3 at $4,600.
If you need to save a couple of $100 and you still want some action from that Washington side, Curtis Samuel is the guy that I like. Good matchup in out of the slot. I know is been very inconsistent, but take out that 2, we got 4, 6, 8, 12 targets. So Curtis Samuel would be the guy for me if you need to save a couple of $100 from Jahan Dotson. I will give one shout out only because all of New England is injured, but Tyquan Thornton at $3,000, if he's going to be one of the only healthy receivers, could be worth a shot. $3,000. We only need about 8 fantasy points to get 2.5 times our investment. So I'll give a quick nod to Tyquan Thornton there. If we go over to tight end, I'll be honest with you, with the way I built my lineups, I only have eyes for about 1 or 2 players at tight end, and I need to save money, and I've been going to Brevin Jordan. Dalton Schultz is out. Jordan steps in as tight end 1. No defense has been friendlier to tight ends this season than the Denver Broncos, and over the last 2 weeks, they've been the 2nd friendliest from a fantasy points per game perspective. So for me, I pretty much only looked at Brevin Jordan, and he's down there basically at minimum price. It allowed me to have a fighter's chance of getting Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the same lineup.
I like that. I immediately thought of that when I saw Dalton Schultz was out, and I wasn't sure who the second guy was. I wasn't even sure, honestly, if Brevin Jordan was still on the roster. So that's the Texans whisperer here. I'm glad that you pointed that out. The guy I went with was David Njoku. No matter who they've got in at quarterback, he's got 6 straight clutch games. Targets are there. I like the price point, and for what else I had in my lineup at $4,100 against the Rams. Not a great matchup. Well, actually is a pretty good matchup. I thought they were a little higher than what they were, but they are actually bottom 5 against the tight end with fantasy points scored. Here again, Joe Flacco is a smart quarterback. he's going to make as good a use as he can of all those weapons. So I looked at Kittle, looked a couple different places, looked at Taysom Hill as well as another place I looked with Chris Olave questionable, Rashid Shaheed out, Michael Thomas out. Another place I went, but I ended up settling on Njoku for $4,100.
I did write in the Who's Hot, Who's Not article this week here at BigGuyFantasySports.com that while Njoku is the tight end 6 over the last 6 weeks, he is the only tight end in the National Football League during that 6-week stretch to have double-digit fantasy points in each game during that 6-week window. So if you're going to go up for Njoku, he's about as consistent as they come over the last 6 weeks. If you need to drop down, I think Brevin Jordan is the logical, probably chalky play there. I'll also give a nod to Tyler Conklin, just because if Tim Boyle is going to be the quarterback, he's going to get 5 targets again. I'll take 2x on my investment there. And Atlanta's been pretty friendly this season to tight ends, allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game. And last but not least, let's touch on the defense here. I know I just talked about a Jets player, but I expect the Falcons defense to be very chalky, going up against a Jets offense that really can't do anything. And then I'll also give a nod to the Lions defense going against New Orleans, just because New Orleans can have their issues moving the ball. Luckily, they're getting Olave back, so that actually gives them a weapon on the outside. So that'll take a little bit of the shine off Detroit. But those are really the only 2 I've been looking at because I have not had enough money to get any of the higher price defenses.
I didn't mind Tampa at 3,600. I had enough left over for them. I know their secondary is not good, but also the guy that they're facing at quarterback on the opposite side is not good. It's a home game. I think they can pick him off a couple times. I think their front 4 can get enough pressure there that they can maybe get to Bryce Young a couple of times there. But $3,600, I didn't think that was bad. A couple, like you went over the Falcons. That was the other one I was looking at too. But with what I had left for my flex and my defense, I thought I'd pay a little bit more up for defense here, but I like that Bucks matchup quite a bit for that price point.
All right, let's go ahead. Let's build the lineup here. So as always, we'll start with each of us. We get one person that we are going to lock into our lineup. Who is your must-have, can't be without player this week?
I think we're going to go the same place here. Quarterback Brock Purdy. That's the guy that you can't go without at $6,100, no doubt.
Oh, I'll cheat then, and I'll go ahead and put in. See, so now this is where it gets interesting. I can put in Ayuk, but you and I both agree on Ayuk. So what I want to use my trump card here to get somebody else that I want that you may not agree with, or maybe just not like as much. If I put in Amon-Ra St. Brown, we're both going to go with Brandon Ayuk. Are we going to have enough for Tyreek Hill? That's where we're going to start running into questions. So, I mean, we can get down to Waddle. It's just, I think it's hard to be without Tyreek this week.
Agreed.
I know he's gonna be highly owned, but I'll go ahead and put in Tyreek Hill for now. I'll be willing to pivot off it. Do you want to throw in Ayuk because we both pretty much agreed on him?
Yeah, I have to. We got to have that stack somewhere with the Niners, and he's obviously the go-to guy.
Yep. Running back position, we pretty much settled in on this down in this like 6,000. So we got Rachaad White against Carolina. We go Ramondre against New England. Oh, I mean, we talked about Zach Moss. Are we throwing him in?
Throws that. I think we're going to have to with those receivers that we've got, especially if we want to try to have any chance to get all Hill, Ayuk, and Amon-Ra in there. We got to go with Zach Moss.
And then if we go running back here, I would really like Rachaad White or Ramondre Stevenson, but we may have to save a little. We could always put one of them in for now and then look to pivot down to like a Najee type.
Put White in now. I like that quite a bit. And then we've got a couple of backup plans here, so I feel good about it no matter what way we go.
All right, let's try this. Let's slide Amon-Ra in. So now we're at 7,700. This is going to get interesting. So let's go Brevin Jordan. Defense. I mean, try Falcons.
Sure.
1,800. Okay, so we're 700 away from another min price player. So we're gonna have to come down from Rachaad White. Go to Najee. That gives us 2,900.
Yeesh.
Well, no. Don't yeesh. We have a chance. My finger's getting tired. Okay. I mean, Houston's bad against tight ends. Oh, okay. They're not that bad. Yeah, okay.
I don't know, man. I don't know if we're going to be able to fit all 3 of those receivers in. Boy, it looks nice, but man, there's nothing here.
All right.
Most of these guys don't even suit up. These are like special teams guys.
Well, I mean, they could fall on a ball.
They could maybe get a fumble recovery. We could really hope for a big play here.
And that's exactly what we want when we preach consistency for a line. We're talking about the freakest of outcomes. What if we dropped the Falcons? I'm trying to do this without moving any of those guys around.
Yeah.
To the Lions. Now we're up to 33. Now we don't have to scroll terribly as far.
Yeah.
There's some.
Okay. So in that 3,300 range, what I was looking at on my flex before, I got Jonathan Mingo at 3,300.
I was thinking that.
Also looked at A.T. Perry at 3,300 for Saints. I mean, we're swinging for the fences on both. Both I think are GPP plays, but those teams are going to have to throw to somebody. And I feel like maybe Mingo might be the way to lean just because there's not as much there. I mean, I feel like if Chris Olave plays, to me, that kind of takes A.T. Perry out. Taysom Hill there as well. But I feel like there's not a lot behind Jonathan Mingo if they're going to have to throw the ball to keep up with Tampa.
Yeah, new play caller. Well, I guess it may not be a new play caller. They may just go back to Thomas Brown if they're going to give it to him now that they fired the coach. But, I mean, he's got 6+ targets in 3 straight games.
Right.
At 3,300, 2x investment would be 6.6 fantasy points. Let's round up and say, can we get to about 8? He's done it twice in the past 5 weeks.
Yeah, we don't need much. We don't need much for it to pay off. But at that range,
Tampa Bay's bad on the perimeter.
Yeah.
All right. So that would give us Brock Purdy, Zach Moss, Najee Harris, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brevin Jordan, Jonathan Mingo, and the Lions defense.
Not half bad. Not half bad.
It isn't bad, really, all things considered. Like, if we can just get, 8 points and 8 points from him, these 3 go nuts. Najee continues to get volume in a good matchup. Zach Moss is the free square. Everybody's going to have him. Purdy at a value, and maybe Derek Carr throws us a bone or two, and we can get with the Lions. And I mean, it's not like the Lions have been bad.
No.
I mean, they have more talent than what some of these numbers indicate. And New Orleans isn't an offense that I'm necessarily afraid of.
No, not a bit.
All right, I like it. That'll be the Week 13 consistently cash in line. Brock Purdy, Zach Moss, Najee Harris, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brevin Jordan, Jonathan Mingo, and the Lions defense. Ron, let everyone know where they can find you and what you got here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports this week.
Yes, sir. At Ron Rigney on the artist formerly known as Twitter, over at BigGuyFantasySports.com as well. As I tell you every week, please check out all the tools over there, all of our friends over there. Check out the Consistency Show with myself and Mr. Bob Long from Thursday night. Of course, this show, you guys just did the Prop It Like It's Hot. You guys got back to your winning ways on that. From what I understand, Colby, you're the main responsible one for that. Bob was kind of riding your coattails last week with a 4-0 week. So nice job with you, my friend. And that overall record looks pretty damn impressive for those bets as well. But come over and check out everything that we got. Always something great going on at BigGuyFantasySports.com.
Yep, I believe Prop It Like It's Hot. I think Bob said we're 50-35 on the year, so it comes out to about 58.8%. I mean, hovering right around 60%, which is kind of the mark to shoot for, I think. It's what the industry, I don't want to say industry standard, because you're just trying to get more right than you get wrong, I guess, at the end of the day. So, yep, doing that. Hopefully we get back on the clutch game wagon here with the Week 13 Consistently Cashing lineup here at BigGuyFantasySports.com. I'll do the Consistently Cashing podcast, Prop It Like It's Hot podcast and article, and on Tuesdays or Wednesdays of each week, the Who's Hot and Who's Not article for you seasonal fantasy football players out there. But give Ron a follow on X. I'm at Colby R. Conway on X, and we will see you next week with the Week 14 edition of the Consistently Cashing podcast.